Oh, well, it's Mother's Day, and so we want to recognize our mothers. So if all the mothers would please stand at this time, take your time. We honor you, and if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here. We're very, very thankful for all of you. You may be seated. Our newest mother is Alexis. She had her little baby, 8 pounds, 3 ounces, something like that, a healthy little baby. And so she's our newest mother. And now we're going to find out who our oldest mother is. Not going to give the exact year, but if you are a mother and you're in your 80s, would you please stand? I'm starting towards the end because we just look how many we have. Isn't that amazing? If you're 85 or older, remain standing. If you're 87 or older, remain standing. 89. 89? 88? Who's 88? We got two 87s? Huh? Is 87 the oldest?
No, 88.
88? Are you 88? 87. 87. Okay. You're our oldest mother. Now, if you're a mother that has more than 5 kids, stand up. More than 5. More than 6. More than 7. There's our mother with the most kids. Now, ladies, when you leave today, all ladies, when you leave today, there's a table out there that has roses on them. And those are for you, you know. So be sure to take one. It reminds me of the story of the kid that was a foreign exchange student. And he was from Germany, and he really appreciated his teacher, and so he bought her a rose, and he gave it to her with this little poem that said, not a little poem, but this little card that says, "This rose will fade and die, but you will smell forever." A little bit of language problem, you know. Yeah. So that rose may fade and die, but oh dear. Let me see if I can find my. So we're going to talk about this morning some mothers from the Bible. And the first one we're going to talk about is Eve. And the reason we start with Eve is because it's very important for us to understand God's creation and purpose of creation. He created man from the dust of the earth, but then he created Eve from Adam's side, from his rib, not from his head that she should rule over him, and not from his feet that he should trample on her, but from his side, that they may be together and work together. And what God said is not good for man to be alone or by himself. I'll make for him a completer, one who completes him. That's really what that concept of creation of a woman's all about, is the completion of man. Now, I will tell you that I needed a lot of completing. So God sent me Denise, who is an unbelievable woman, just a special creation. And he picked just the right person who is patient, who is kind, who is gentle, who is a good cook, who bakes well, who... And it's an amazing thing that when you come together and God joins you together, and we in our marriage vows often say, what God has joined together, let no man try to separate. What God has joined together. When you come before the Lord and you're joined by him. And it says, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. What's very interesting about that whole concept was, if you understand the history and culture, was that when a person got married, the parents were involved in that, and they often were the ones who chose the spouse. But after they got married, they would go live in a patriarchal society. In other words, they moved in with the mom and dad, but they had their own place. They added their own part onto the house. And when we go to Israel, we're going to go this next week, we're going to go to a place, and you're going to see a house with lots and lots of rooms. It's a big house. And the reason was that because the children would live on the same property. So the verse that shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife wasn't physical. It wasn't a physical separation from mother and father. It was a attachment, completion, joining together so that they became their own family. They became their own family. And the two shall become one flesh. And if you think about that, that when father and a mother have a child, the two of them create one flesh. So it's God's design. So motherhood, women, we were created by God. Now, somehow we never got the manual, the guys. When he created women, he created them, and we have not been able to figure it out ever since. Men do their best to try to understand, and they just this doesn't work, And they're upset, and you say, is everything okay? Yeah. Yes. So, mixed signals, you know what I'm saying? When, just leave me alone. That's when they don't want to be left alone. I don't know. But the point is that God created this union as a completion of humanity. And therefore, the result in children, childbearing, creates mothers. And mothers are very unique. Even if you weren't a mother before, if you become a mother, certain instincts take over. They found out that in this great problem we have in America with abortions, that when people are trying to get rid of an unwanted child, they go have an abortion. And the Christ and Pregnancy Center, it's called something else now, found out that if they could do a sonogram and actually show the baby, it changed the heart of the person about getting an abortion. Because all of a sudden they see a living being within them, and those instincts start to kick in. So God gave women this innate desire to nurture and to care for. And it's kind of interesting because sometimes you think about parenting and we think about, well, we need to have a plan of parenting and all this kind of thing. But generally speaking, the default mode for a mother is concern for her child in knowing things. Sometimes the default for the father is the child behaving so it reflects on him. He has well-behaved children. A mother wants the child to be the best that they can be and wants to watch out for them so they don't have to face things that are tough in life. And they're very concerned over them. A mother has spent hours in prayer. In fact, I'm looking forward to when we get to heaven and Jesus says to my mother, "You're a prayer warrior." And because I'm the one that caused her to be a prayer warrior. Because, you have a child like me and you just, pretty soon just say, "Okay, Lord, what can I do? Help me." And, but it's true, the concern and care that comes with a mother. And Eve began it all. And here's about that we just asked, why do we ask who had the most children? Because the real winner is Eve. You see, when God first built us, he built us very good. He says, "It is good." And they lived into their 900s. And they had children clear up when they were 600 years old. Now that is pretty amazing. If you were to relate that today, and we were to take, instead of living 930, 960 years, whatever, you would say you lived 80, 90 years old. So it's about a 10%. So that'd be like having children till you're 60 years old. When can you start childbearing? Pretty young, 15 years old, 16 years old. Now, we don't in America have that happen a lot. We do have it happen. There are those things, those occasions, but there actually are people who get married quite young. In fact, in this country at one time, they used to get married very young. And you see, children were considered to be an asset because we're an agricultural society. If you know anything about farming, what do you know about farming? The more hands you have, the easier the work. You ever heard this, many hands make light work? So when you had children, what were they? They were part of the workforce. The bigger the farm, the more children you need to have. And so they had families, 10, 12 children. It wasn't uncommon. And they even lost some along the way. A lot of times they had more like 15 kids, and they lost 3 or 4 children through different things. But children were considered an asset. They were considered to be a good thing. The Bible talks about constantly through the Bible about that. And so Eve begins it all. And for maybe 600 years, she's having kids. Probably not one a year or anything, but she's having lots and lots of kids. Lots and lots of kids. So who has the most kids? Eve. Eve had the most kids. Absolutely amazing. What's interesting about that is that she had kids that married one another. We've gotten away from that, and the Bible taught against that later on. But at the beginning, the gene pool was so strong, it didn't get diluted by that. It didn't get diluted by that. So she had lots and lots and lots and lots of children. Can you imagine? I was at a place the other day, and the gal was trying to call her son. And she went through like 5 names or 4 names. And I said, those are all your kids, huh? And she says, yeah. But I'm going to get to the right one in a minute. Yeah, that would happen sometimes with Denise's family. Debbie, Deanne, Danelle, Denise, going through all those. Can you imagine how long it took Eve to get to the right kid once in a while? And think about naming them. Think about naming all those kids. It's absolutely amazing the ability they had, because they were naming everything, plants, animals, children. Pretty amazing person Eve would have been, and how strong she would have been, and how important it was that she set the standard for how to be a mother and a parent. She was the first one. She and Adam had to go it for the first time and learn. And probably by about the 20th kid, they started knowing more about how to do it. So the ones that came later, the baby of the family that they had when she was like 600. Just think about that. We really can't process that. There's nothing in our minds that would do that. I mean, what do you do at supper time? Time for dinner. Okay, 100 of you over here. You talk about your family dinners. Wow. That's pretty amazing stuff. I sometimes today I still have people who they come and they say, can we use the social hall for our family have dinner? Because just the cousins, we've got about 75, The families used to live in the same area, and so it's pretty amazing. Think about all the dynamics of the first mother, and then you'll have it a little bit easier. Remember, no dishwasher, no washer dryer. Of course, when they're first in the garden, they didn't have to worry about a washer and dryer anyway. Never mind. Anyway, they don't have any of the luxuries that we have now. It was all homemade. It was cooking from what? Scratch. Couldn't go down and buy one of them box dinners. Just think about all the dynamics of what it was like to raise children at the time of Adam and Eve, and all the responsibilities that they had. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. And that's where it all started. It all started with Eve. The second mother I'd like to talk about is Hannah. And Hannah is the mother of Samuel. And if we go to 1 Samuel chapter 1, we get a little insight into Hannah. Samuel chapter 1. Now there was a certain man of Ratham, Zophim, of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroboam, the son of Eli, the son of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he had 2 wives. One was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from the city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions of Peninnah, his wife, to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb, and her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable. Now, can you believe this? Two women in the same household. You have a personal experience? And one of them actually wants to make the other one miserable. Wives vying for their husband's attention, and especially if the husband happened to like one a little better than the other. Well, what you can imagine. Well, the story goes on that she made Hannah's life miserable. Absolutely miserable. And so Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat of the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on me, on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but I will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come to his head. So what'd she do? She prayed to the Lord, but not selfishly. She actually said, Lord, if you'll give me a child, I'll give him to you. Now this is kind of an important step as we go through the scriptures, because for God so loved the world that he gave his son. God so loved the world, he gave his son. Hannah loved the Lord so much that she would give him her son. Very interesting thought and concept. And as it happened, she continued praying before the Lord that Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah spoke in her heart only, her lips moved. But her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, how long will you be drunk? Put wine away from you. So what he sees is Hannah praying so fervently, and he knows that she's gone through this time of misery. He figured that she just got drunk. Which is another interesting thing, is that she would give the symptoms, the outside view, that she was absolutely drunk. It's very interesting to me because the scripture says, do not be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. And it has been the case that sometimes people in fervent prayer have looked like they were drunk. Very interesting concept. In fervency, in tears, and in anguish, she was praying. Her prayer was so deep that she really couldn't even utter words. That's kind of an interesting concept and thought. Have you ever been choked up before? You know, every once in a while I'll do a wedding, and right during the wedding, something will strike me, and I get choked up. Probably because I feel sorry for the guy. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't say that. Don't even, just let that one pass through. But because I know them so well, I get choked up. And then it's very hard to talk. And sometimes you can't talk. Have you ever seen anybody, at a memorial service, some other place, and they just have to stop because they can't talk? Can you imagine the depth of that emotion? And this is kind of what Hannah had. She was so in depth in her prayer, she wasn't even talking. But in her heart, she continued to pray. And she prayed, and guess what God did? He gave her a son. And she became a mother. Number two, that's kind of interesting to me, is the psalmist says, "In my mother's womb, you knit me." There's probably a better word for knit in Hebrew. I don't remember what it is. Because, the picture I get is two needles going. But that's not the concept. The concept is you created me. You created me in my mother's womb. And I was thinking about that. If you really understand that scripture properly, you would understand that you were made by God. We tend to think biologically. We think the husband and the wife get together and the little thing swims into the egg and boom, all this stuff. And we get into this biology part of it. But the reality is God created you by the use of those physical things, but He created each and every one of you to be who you are, the way you are. It's a very freeing thing. When I was working with youth, oftentimes one of the number one major problems was that kids had a bad self-view of themselves. They just, there's always something wrong. In fact, every once in a while, I just say, take a piece of paper and write on it. If you could change one thing about your physical body, what would it be? None of them ever came back blank. None. Because they all felt self-conscious about something. Ears, nose, mouth, eyes, whatever. It's like that one girl that I met in school. She had very affectionate eyes. They were always looking at each other. I wouldn't say she was cross-eyed, but every time she cried, the tears ran down her back. No, but everybody has something that they're self-conscious about. What they don't understand is God created you to be who you are. And God doesn't make anything junk. He makes everything beautiful in His eyes. And God has created every one of us. We're not just on our own. That didn't just happen. But God actually created each of us to be who we are. Now, we may do stuff to ourselves to hinder or help. J. Vernon McGee, an old Bible teacher, very conservative guy who would go through the Bible year after year, was on the radio. He died years ago. He's still on the radio, and people are still writing him, But J. Vernon McGee was asked by a woman, because it used to be a problem. They'd say, "Can you wear makeup?" Because at one time, you couldn't wear makeup, you couldn't wear nylons, all these different rules and regulations. And so they said to J. Vernon McGee, said, is it unspiritual to wear makeup? And he said in his own way, "Well, I think a good coat of paint can help any old barn." God made us, we can help or destroy what God has done, but understand, you were specially made by God. And that's the case, that God creates us all. So Hannah received a son who she kept her vow and promise to God and gave him to God. Samuel would go on to anoint David, who would be the first anointed king of Israel. Tremendous story about Samuel and his passion for the Lord. And that all started from a mother who desired in her heart to give a son to God and did all she could to shape that and help that. Do you think mothers have an influence on their children? You better believe it. When my boys were in high school and college, they kind of decided to explore life a little bit differently. And the last thing in the world would ever believe is that they'd be pastors. Daniel, a musician, was going to go on to teach music at school and so forth. And David had other ideas as well, and he actually became an attorney, practicing attorney. But you know something? They became pastors. And you want to know who probably had the greatest influence on that? I don't think it was me. I think it was Denise. Because she had a passion and a heart for them and prayed for them and cared for them. What do you think it's like for a father when the phone rings and your son's on the phone? Oh, hi, David. Is mom there? Hi, Daniel. Is mom there? And it's an amazing thing. Mothers have a huge, huge influence. It's not like fathers don't have any influence. I hope we have some influence. But mothers, designed by God to be exactly who they are. Nurturers, carers, overseers of their children in every area, including spiritual. Oftentimes, unfortunately, they tend to be more of a leader in spiritual things than the fathers do. It's a sad thing. Fathers should be the leader in spiritual things. But Hannah shaped her son, given to God, and let him know told him the story, you know. I prayed, God gave you to me, and I've given you to God, and you're going to serve the Lord. And he did. The last one we want to talk about is Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now here's a mother who had a very unique thing, only happened to her. And that is that God chose her to become the mother of Jesus, the Son of God. Before she was married, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit, who once again, we go back to that being knit in the womb. This is a very interesting concept because this time there's no biological male involved. It is the creation in the womb of Jesus. Now, Adam was taken from the dust of the earth, and Jesus was brought into the womb of a mother because he was to be born of a woman. It was prophesied that he'd be born of a woman. But it is God who created Jesus. And since there was no seed, biological male seed, the seed that brings in the disobedience, men, you get chose for that. Your seed carries the disobedient seed in it. We go back, remember, to the garden, and Eve ate of the fruit first. But did God hold her accountable? No. He held the one who was supposed to be in charge of her, caring for her, looking out for her, and correcting, and he didn't do it. And so it says, as by one man sin entered the world. Now, this is a great Mother's Day sermon because, men, you get the responsibility here, And what was his answer when asked about that? She ate first. Yeah. Yeah. It's not my fault, it's her fault. And she said, no, it's the serpent's fault. Passing the buck. But the reality is, by one man's seed, by one man, sin entered the world, and his seed then carries with it the Adamic nature, Adam's nature. And since Jesus was created in the womb by God, he did not receive that seed. Therefore, he was created without sin. The only person other than Adam and Eve who were created without sin. Only one. So he was perfect in his holiness from birth and lived a life without sin. I don't know if you know how hard that would be. I was fortunate to receive the Lord when I was between 5 and 6. I think it was towards the end of being 5, but I could have been 6. It was when I was in first grade. My birthday's in the fall, so I never can tell. So I just I'll just say close to 6. Now that's a good thing, but I want to tell you something. It was a hard thing. Because you understand that when you become a Christian at age 6, that your life is supposed to go in a certain direction. You're supposed to become spiritually mature, and you're supposed to keep away from sin. Sin is poison. Do not sin. But I was a boy, a real boy, and mischief came for me easily. I didn't have to think. I could do stuff without even, well, I shouldn't say that because I did. Lots of stuff without thinking. That's a hard thing to do. Jesus grew his entire life and lived his entire life without one sin. Think about that. Think about that. And Mary was chosen to be his mother. And Mary knew what was going to happen to him from the time he was born. How would you like to know that your son was going to have to die for others? But she was able to handle that because she knew that that was God's will. And she gave her will to God. And she became a mother who was also obedient, even to the giving of her son to die on a cross. And I will tell you, I don't know, I've never had to experience it, and I thank the Lord for that. But from my observation, the hardest thing in the world there is to lose a child. To lose a child is really, 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 really bad. It's really tough. And Mary knew that Jesus was going to be sacrificed. That was a tough thing. Can you imagine being a mother having to carry that your entire life? That's a mother. Sacrificial, caring, loving, would do anything that she could so that didn't have to happen, but knew that it did have to happen. And so the last thing I want you to know about mothers is that they're willing to let God be in charge of their children. A godly mother is willing to let God be in charge of their children. So if the child is going to serve the Lord and you don't think it's going to be healthy for them or good for them, you still let them do what they have to do for the Lord. And missionaries and others who have been killed on the field, serving the Lord, they all had mothers. And the mothers had to watch them go. Many a time, mothers had to suffer the loss. And you know what? It is not easier even knowing those kind of things. It's not an easy thing. So I think mothers suffer extra when they lose a child. I think fathers do too. But there's something about that. But mothers are great, aren't they? And we honor them today. We thank you for being mothers. And we thank you for your sacrifices. And we thank you for what you've done. And it hasn't gone unnoticed. And it hasn't gone without merit. So, mothers, thank you.